Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, today we are diving into a literal game changer in the tech world. The European Union has just dropped a sweeping, entirely proactive framework for artificial intelligence. We're talking about a colossal global benchmark here, one that prioritizes human rights, transparency, and accountability, and it is going to fundamentally rewire how AI is developed and deployed across the entire world.
So, let's just get right into it. The absolute first question you're probably asking yourself is, hey, does the EU AI Act actually apply to my company if we aren't, physically based in Europe? Well, let me just burst that bubble right now. This law stretches way, way beyond the physical borders of the EU. Experts are actually calling this a new Brussels effect, and is super reminiscent of the massive influence wielded by the GDPR. Think of GDPR as our reference point here. Just like that completely shifted global privacy, the AI Act casts a massive net. It basically applies to you, any provider or deployer, if the output of your AI system is intended to be used in the EU. So picture this. You build a slick new tool in Silicon Valley, but its predictions, recommendations, or generated content end up in the hands of users in Paris or Berlin. Boom. You are officially caught in this regulatory framework. You even have to appoint an authorized representative inside the EU just to ensure compliance. Wild, right?
Section 2. Defining AI and models.
Right, so to even figure out if we need to comply, we've got to strip away the legal jargon. What actually is an AI system under this law? Well, the Act defines it as a machine-based system that operates with varying levels of autonomy. But the absolutely crucial keyword here, the one you need to remember, is infers. For a system to literally be considered AI, it has to infer from the input it receives how to generate outputs. Things like predictions, content, decisions. It's this specific capability to infer that totally separates true AI from just a basic logic system or a really fancy calculator.
Let's actually visualize this distinction. On one side, we've got traditional software. This is stuff operating strictly on rules defined in advance by human programmers. Take logistic regression in the finance world, for example. It's heavily based on stats and math, but it doesn't infer. So guess what? It sits entirely outside the scope of the Act. But on the other side, we have an AI system. If your system is built using techniques that allow it to basically create its own rules based on the input data it gets, well, that's inference. And that means the AI Act absolutely applies to you.
Which brings us to Section 3, the risk-based pyramid.
So how exactly does the EU plan to regulate all this? They're taking a super direct, technology-neutral approach here. They're categorizing AI systems strictly based on the potential harm they could pose to health, safety, and fundamental human rights. Think of it like a giant pyramid. At the very bottom, we've got minimal or no-risk systems. These face literally zero direct regulatory restrictions under the Act. In the middle, you have high-risk systems, and these are slapped with incredibly strict requirements. And then right at the very top is unacceptable risk. These are practices deemed so dangerous, so harmful, that they're outright prohibited. The level of regulation scales perfectly with the risk to human rights.
All right, Section 4, prohibited AI practices.
Let's dive straight into the deep end, the very top of that risk pyramid, the unacceptable practices. And listen up, because the ban on these practices has been actively enforced across the EU since February 2025. These are use cases the EU considers fundamentally against their core values. We're talking about things like social scoring systems that judge people based on personal traits. We're talking about predicting if someone will commit a crime solely based on profiling. No way, not allowed. It also completely bans untargeted scraping of the internet or CCTV for facial recognition databases, and even using AI to infer people's emotions at work or school. So, take a second and ask yourself, could any part of your data pipeline or product roadmap accidentally be touching these banned areas?
Now, to be fair, these prohibitions aren't 100% absolute. There are some incredibly narrow, highly specific legal exceptions. For instance, real-time remote biometric identification by law enforcement in public spaces, generally banned. But it is allowed in very specific, pre-authorized, and extremely limited circumstances. But make no mistake, outside of those tiny little carve-outs, these practices are totally illegal in the EU market. Let's step down to Section 5, High Risk and Transparency Rules. Okay, stepping down from the unacceptable tier, we land in the middle of our pyramid, high-risk AI systems. This is your AI used in really high-stakes areas: employment, education, credit scoring, that kind of thing.
If your system falls into this bucket, the compliance burden on your shoulders is massive. You've got to maintain extensive technical documentation for every single development stage. You have to definitively prove you used high-quality training data and literally guarantee the system's accuracy, robustness, and top-tier cybersecurity. And on top of the whole shebang, before you can even launch it, you have to register it in a public EU database and secure a CE marking.
And here's the kicker. This doesn't just impact the original developer. Let's see how this builds across the ecosystem. The AI Act pushes responsibility up and down the entire supply chain. Sure, the provider, the developer, carries the heaviest load, but importers, distributors, and deployers all have specific duties to verify compliance too. But, and this is a huge warning, if you're an importer or a deployer and you simply slap your own name or trademark on a third-party high-risk system, or if you modify its intended purpose, boom! Legally, you just became the provider. You instantly inherit all those heavy, high-risk compliance burdens we just talked about.
Now we really need to make a quick but important distinction here. The Act mainly regulates AI systems, right? But it actually has a totally separate set of rules for general-purpose AI models. Think large language models, the ones that have significant generality and can competently handle a huge range of tasks. These foundational models get their very own specific rules, guided by a code of practice, and they have extra layers of regulation specifically designed for models that pose massive systemic risks.
And don't think you're off the hook just because your system isn't high risk. You might still get caught up in the mandatory transparency rules. The Act explicitly demands transparency if your AI interacts directly with human beings, if it generates synthetic audio, video, or text, or if it makes deepfakes. In all those scenarios, you are legally obligated to literally tell users they are interacting with AI, and you must mark the outputs in a machine-readable way so everyone can clearly identify them as artificially generated.
All right, the moment of truth. Section 6, fines and future timelines.
So, what does this all mean? What actually happens if you just ignore this incredibly complex framework? Let's bring in the hammer. If you deploy one of those prohibited AI practices like the social scoring or the untargeted facial scraping, the fines are, quite frankly, astronomical. You could be staring down penalties of up to 35 million euros. Or, get this, if you're a company, up to 7% of your total worldwide annual turnover for the preceding financial year, whichever is higher. Just let that sink in for a second. 7% of your global revenue. Yikes.
And what if you mess up the higher risk rules or break the rules for general-purpose AI models? Well, that secondary tier still packs a massive punch. We're talking administrative fines of up to 15 million euros, or 3% of your worldwide annual turnover. Heck, even just giving incorrect or misleading info to the authorities can cost you 7.5 million euros, or 1% of your turnover. They are for sure not messing around.
And please, do not think this is some distant, futuristic problem. The clock is already ticking loudly. The Act was officially published back in July 2024, and as of February 2025, that ban on prohibited practices, that is actively enforced right now. Looking ahead, by August 2025, the rules for general-purpose AI models kick in, and by August 2026, those sweeping, heavy rules for high-risk AI systems will generally start applying across the board.
Okay, but actually, scratch the panic for just a second. There is a tiny potential lifeline being debated right now. In November 2025, the Commission published a draft for a digital omnibus regulation. Basically, acknowledging that getting all these harmonized standards ready takes a lot of time, this draft proposes pushing some of those compliance deadlines for specific high-risk AI systems out to late 2027, maybe even 2028. It might also lower some administrative burdens. But, and this is absolutely key, it is just a draft right now. It has to pass through the whole legislative gauntlet before any of that relief is actually locked in.
As you can probably tell, figuring out your specific obligations, the exemptions, and the technical standards, it's a massive, giant puzzle. Navigating this landscape successfully means you really need to dive into comprehensive source materials. We heavily relied on an incredibly detailed guide published by Bird & Bird to put today's explainer together, and I highly recommend doing that kind of deep dive yourself. You absolutely have to know exactly where your systems sit on that risk pyramid. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. That whole era of moving fast and breaking things with AI in the European market? Yeah, that is officially over. The Brussels effect is in full swing. Knowing that your global revenue is literally on the line and knowing that the strictest bans are already active, I challenge you to look closely at your organization today. Is your tech stack truly ready for the new era of global AI regulation? It is definitely time to audit, adapt, and align.
Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.